Hi, everyone. Welcome to PAYCO's general membership meeting for January 23rd. Want to give a shout out to Anderson's reporting for continuing to provide us with Zoom capabilities for our meetings. So shout out to them. Thank you so much, Anderson's. Some announcements that we'll start off with today. Statewide committee is leading our food drive. So keep watching the news or look at the drop-offs. They've added more drop-offs that I'll be adding to the PAYCO news later today, and we'll go out tomorrow in the news. And that begins Friday. It's running for 2 weeks. Some other updates. February 15th is the OSBA Paralegal Committee meeting, which is during the day now. They're trying to do them away from Saturday mornings. It'll be noon to 1:30 that day. Feel free to sign up. And also, like, hold the dates are going to be coming out for Paralegal Day, which is in May. It is the third Monday of May, so May 15th this year. And at the biennial workshop and exhibition, which we have not had one since 2019 due to COVID, we are going to be having one this year. So be looking out for news on that as well. We usually typically have it in September. So we will kick off and move on to our speaker for today. It's my pleasure to introduce Cassandra Struble. Cassandra is a 500-hour certified yoga and meditation instructor through YogaFit. She also obtained her Warriors 140-hour trauma-sensitive certification and holistic whole body health 100-hour teacher certification. This year, Cassandra will complete 4 additional YogaFit 100-hour certifications. And has started a regular meditating practice in 1998. She's the owner of Complete Life Balance since 2019. Her core belief is anyone at any physical level can enjoy yoga and meditation while honoring their bodies. Cassandra offers virtual yoga sessions 5 days a week and can tailor any session to her client's current yoga experience by offering modifications in simple understanding language. Cassandra is also an associate compliance specialist with Amazon. She is a PAYCO member, and she is the committee chair for Wild Apricot, our website, and many, many, many things, all PAYCO. So Cassandra, welcome. Thank you for doing this for us today. And I'm going to hand the reins over to you.
Okay, hopefully everything goes simple today, but talk about when your anxiety goes up. My name is Cassandra Struble, and again, like Becky said, I am a 500-hour certified yoga instructor and meditation instructor. To put the cart before the horse, I wasn't a person who started yoga and then fell into meditation. Like Becky said, I started a meditation practice at 18. And then I fell into yoga when I worked at Nationwide and had an opportunity to take some basic yoga and get comfortable with some basic postures. At that point, I fell in love with yoga, and the teacher that I worked with introduced me to YogaFit, who I am certified through. A lot of my background too, and growing up, I was raised, and I'm going to use, as I say, I'm presenting today, I'm going to use some terms that might be a little bit weird. However, when I teach, I don't typically speak in Swahili or anything like that. I always speak in English. However, there are some things I'm going to have to, because there's no way to break them down. But I was raised in an Ayurvedic house. So my mother worked for an Ayurvedic practitioner and a therapist who they actually use a lot of these techniques, breathing techniques, Reiki, meditation, and then a couple other ways. And they actually used to have an Ayurvedic practitioner on site, which is not a scary word. It's just the Eastern version of Western medicine. So really thinking about your body as a wheel. So first things first, I'm going to send in chat. Hopefully it went, oh, it says it's restricted. So I'm trying to send a wheel, but I'll show it to you guys and then I'll attach it later in an email. Just talking about how our wheel of life is, and we're going to talk a little bit more about it. But as we're creating this wellness initiative for PAYCO, we want to think about this wheel as our wellness wheel. And so lots of people look and they see my company symbol as a wheel. In order to function and move along in life, we have to be a wheel. We have to balance ourselves out. And sometimes our wheel is going to look different inside, but we, however, have to keep our wheel rolling. So when we were talking about PAYCO and what we can do, that's where this idea kind of initiated. However, I would highly like to recommend and welcome anybody who knows anybody who teaches and would love to do some free classes for PAYCO to reach out to me as part of our wellness initiative, because I'd like to get a lot of varied classes as well as opportunities for our members to just have a little stress relief and get healthy and the best of them in 2023. So that's kind of where I'm starting from. The reason I brought up me growing up in an Ayurvedic house is that some of the things that I'm going to talk about may seem very weird, but they have been proven to be very healthy, as well as rebalancing and grounding ourselves. So you'll hear me a lot today talk about grounding, and it's not a crazy thing. It's just bringing our feet back down to the earth and connecting to where we are in this moment. So I always start off talking about this thing that my mother used to make us do when we were younger, when we would get really stressed, really overwhelmed, really anxious, did not matter what season it was, we were required to take our shoes off and walk in the grass. Just the feeling of feeling something in a different texture against our skin can rebalance some of our senses. So that's kind of a grounding activity. I did it through college and stuff like that. My friends thought I was crazy. However, now when you look back, there's a lot of things that talk about just grounding our energy and grounding back down to where we are in our wheel, in our balance, can be very beneficial in our personal lives, our social lives, and as well as our work environments, because I know a lot of us work in very stressful environments. I started at Amazon in November, but before that, I was 4 years as a litigation paralegal. And when I stopped sleeping at night, I was like, whoo, I have got to try some different things. So today's going to be interactive. I'm going to kind of go through some slides. We're going to have fun. And at the end, we're actually going to do a breathing practice, a meditation, and some yoga sitting in our chair. The slides that I'm going to use for the yoga will have the position standing. So if you're in a place that you can stand, you have an opportunity to do that. However, I'm going to show them in our chairs. So if we're sitting in our chairs, we're not like, someone's like, what is that person doing over the cubicle? So first things first, let me see if I can get my screen shared. And I should tell you that I know, I think I know a lot about Zoom, but then some days I'm like this. All right, can you guys all see my screen? Okay, perfect. So like I said, I am the owner of Complete Life Balance Yoga. And what brought me here is I was teaching in the gyms before COVID happened. I had a lot of my students that were going through some stuff and they were like, I need you to keep teaching. So during COVID, my husband and I built out a yoga studio in my gym, or a yoga studio in my basement, which is also my office. And I started teaching virtually. And as COVID let up, my students were like, I really don't want to go back to a gym. And one thing I noticed as an instructor that I loved is my students started showing up more. So when they had to go to a gym, they were showing up once a week. As soon as I said, let's go online, now they're showing up 3-4 days a week. So I see the results with my students more often as to where they want to take their yoga practice. So here's the wheel that I talked about that I couldn't get to go as a PDF. As you can see, to balance our wheel, we need to have a lot of different attributes. So we need to think about our healthy eating. We need to think about our network, our support, the people we have around us. What is our motivation level? How are we managing our stress? Where is our self-confidence? What about our attitude and how we talk to ourselves? Are we moving today? Are we walking? Are we stretching? And how's our sleep? These things combined is what creates a more balanced wellness approach. I this year have asked my students to stop making resolutions and to start setting intentions, what we're going to talk about a little bit more later. However, when we set a resolution, we're saying, this is how I am going to be every single day in order to be perfect. When we create an intention, we can say, I intend to eat healthier today. And if we ate better than yesterday, we take away a lot more positivity and self-talk because we made a different choice. And that can go a long way in our wellness journey instead of believing every day we failed. But we're going to talk more about the self-talk down here. But using this wheel when we kind of fall out of balance, it can be a good reset to be like, okay, I've stopped moving. That's really setting off me not sleeping well at night. My motivation is down and I feel like my stress is up. So this is something to come back to. And like I said, I can send it out to you guys so you can actually do the activity another day when I'm not here. So next I'm going to talk about self-care. So that's the bigger umbrella for me that wellness falls under. Self-care is defined as the practice of taking action to preserve or improve one's health, and a practice of taking an active role in protecting one's own well-being and happiness, in particular during periods of stress, and expressing oneself as an essential form of self-care. So when we're thinking about our wellness and our wellness balance, and we think about self-care, the moment we get stressed, the first thing we do is we don't have time for self-care. So how do we work this back into our stressful days in 5, 10, 15-minute increments? And how can we get a better self-care regimen just by picking one thing to take care of ourselves? I also like this slide because number 2 is really important. How do we protect our well-being? Lots of times we create these self-care things, then we stress ourselves out because we haven't done our self-care thing. And then we're freaking out because we're not happy so it becomes this ball that starts rolling. When we think about protecting our self-care, it's finding things that we enjoy and making time for that and not allowing for other things to come into our space. And it could be as much as coloring at night. It can be something like journaling at night, something that actively gives us that space to find our own little stress release. And I think that's important about protecting that. I recently took a session on grief and loss, and last year, I know a lot of people had change in this area. And when we think about grief and loss, it can be very specific to losing a person. However, it can be specific to losing a relationship, losing a job, losing something that we depended on that created stability. And in recent studies, when people talked about going through grief and loss, 83% said they felt just sadness. 43% reported that they were sad and depressed. And of that group, 19% reported they were sad, depressed, had experienced long periods of anxiety as well as PTSD. So when we're thinking about this, a lot of people think of grief as sadness. However, we don't always think about the anxiety and the PTSD that we often don't talk about, that people really go through when they are adapting to change or grief or loss. So that's a lot of where the self-care comes in, is regulating our anxiety. So one of my favorite things to say is anxiety is looking forward, depression is looking back. And so where we talked about grounding, part of our wellness initiative is finding that place that we can find an easier balance. So thinking of our next slide here, is self-care selfish? So lots of times when people are like, oh, you want to have a facial, you're going to go to the gym, you're going to do this, you're not spending time with me. You kind of look at that self-care as something that you can, again, give up in order to find your balance. And sometimes we need to find an easier way to get our self-care in. And here in this slide, I like this because she's just spending time petting a dog. And believe it or not, there are tons of studies that show just petting our animals and giving them that attention can do worlds of good for our wellness and balancing. Our animals can sense when things are off. And I also like this little challenge here, should you choose to accept it, it is to spend 60 seconds thinking about all the ways you are awesome. And that's another good self-care thing that ties into our self-talk, is that we need to take care of ourselves so that we can view ourselves as being awesome beings who are flowing through this world. So another little statistic here, and thinking about this, a lot of time, the biggest point where we give up our self-care is if we have experienced any type of anxiety or PTSD. And Becky had mentioned that I had done a 140-hour training through Yoga Fit regarding PTSD. And I like to talk about this here only because PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress syndrome, is a very new concept in mainstream, but however has been a study in our warriors, our armed forces for quite a few decades, just because they realize that this is leading to a lot of suicides and a lot of more trauma put on our armed forces who are already dealing with some very traumatic events. And that's a big part of Yoga Fit and the association I went through. Through a lot of studies, they have found 70% of adults experience at least one traumatic event in their lives. 20% of people who experience a traumatic event will develop PTSD. About 8 million people have PTSD in a given year. 1 in 13 people will develop PTSD at some point in their life. And why we think of this thing as PTSD as this big, scary thing, it's really not. All in the scientific world of things, all PTSD is your blood pressure staying elevated over 160 beats per hour at a consistent rate where we can't bring that breathing in. Studies have shown that the longer we stay with our blood pressure going up as we're dealing with this accelerated, scary, anxious event, the longer that event is going to stay in our nervous system and stay in our bodies. And our bodies speak our minds, and those things will come out in different places. And so that's the times you can process and deal with anxiety and PTSD. However, lots of us don't like to think about it that way. And a traumatic event can be anything as simple as, again, something that's elevated, a car accident. So I like for people to kind of think about this, because this is a lot of times what is blocking us from our self-care and our self-talk. To kind of switch directions here, a lot of times the number one thing people complain once they experience PTSD is not getting sleep. So when we think about our wheel of balance, how many people here get at least 6 hours of sleep? You guys can put your hands up if you would like. And then how many people get 8 hours of sleep? And then how many people get 5 hours or less of sleep? I'm trying to see my windows here. So you can see sleep is kind of a varied topic. And I will tell you, hands down, I admit as a teacher and anybody who knows me, this is my weakest area. So when we think about our sleep and how we're getting our sleep, it's very important that we think about this on our wellness well. Some people have to have those 8 hours. Some people have to have those 6. However, some people can see sleep as a bad coping skill. So thinking about, are we getting too much sleep? You know, as opposed to getting not enough sleep. So sometimes thinking about sleep as a positive and a negative, but creating again that balance of our wellness, because a lot of people don't think about, and again, there's more and more studies that show sleep is very important to our wellness and our wellness goals. We're more likely to stop doing the healthy habits when we're tired. You know, if we've slept through much throughout the day, we might not feeling like going to the gym. So thinking about sleep as our big part of our puzzle, but again, thinking about how once we go through an experience or we're maybe very stressed at work to the point that we are not sleeping, how is that affecting our overall wellness? Our next slide here is talking about how many practice self-care. So I'm going to give everybody a couple seconds down in the box if you practice self-care to let me know if you practice self-care and how often. See what anybody says, like anything. Once a month. Okay, and that's typical. A lot of people think of self-care as once a month. Perfect, every day. Some people are doing it every day, once a month. Perfect. So how do we get it more in our practice? Nice, every day. So we take care of ourselves every day. Some people are thinking of it about once a month. How about we think about it on more broad terms? Thinking about how often we're practicing self-care just by practicing positive self-talk. maybe taking one step at a time, or forgiving ourselves. These are also different ways over here in this window to talk about ways we can take care of ourselves when we're trying to heal, we're trying to cope, or we're just trying to maybe accomplish more goals. Because again, as we're talking about our wellness and we're talking about coping skills here, so we're talking about using our breath, working out, our sleep, all of this stuff to find a better wellness. And a lot of that wellness, and as we've been talking about, is our coping skills. So when we say we're practicing self-care, are we also at the same time practicing some coping skills? So sometimes I think this is where goal setting can come into play. And we can think about it as a way to kind of reset. Because sometimes when we get into a negative rut, we've started talking about ourselves in a negative light. We've stopped doing our habits. We've stopped honoring our needs, and we're not expressing ourselves. We can often stop setting goals. However, to get back on that wagon, that's where we need to often come and think about our goals here. So as this thing says, goals, there's no telling what you can do when you're inspired by them. And there's no telling what you can do when you believe in them. And there's no telling what will happen when you act upon them. So this is one way and one coping skill that a lot of people think about when they get stuck. Their self-care has fallen off, their habits are falling off. How can we create little goals and little routines to get us back on tap? Again, everybody said they were practicing self-care every day in that big general bubble, but how many of us are goal setting as part of our self-care? And this is a big part that reassures us and makes us feel we're on the right track. People will even say, in a lot of the coaching classes I've taken, start with 3. If you are extremely depressed, you're trying to get back on it, and literally to yourself, you're like, I'm lucky if I shower and brush my teeth today and take my vitamins. That's 3 goals. And there is many scientific studies that show checking off those goals, putting them down on a list, marking them off will actually give you a feeling of accomplishment. It will start to give you bigger goals. You'll start to think in terms of what more you can do. And again, starting to deal with that stress. Now we're setting goals. We're taking that energy, that anxiety, and we're putting it into something that benefits us and gives us wellness and self-care. So thinking about, in our self-care, are we often taking time to evaluate our goals? If we're doing that every day. And so again, this one just talks about how often are we reflecting on our goals. So if you are a goal setter, and maybe you say you don't practice self-care, but as we just talked about, if you are a goal setter, you are practicing self-care. Maybe going back and thinking about how often you reflect on the goal sheets that you set. Do you ever go back and maybe you've fallen off and then you decided you were going to go back to this diet, and you reflect on when you fell off the wagon so that you can prevent yourself from falling off the wagon again. So lots of times our goals are just about keeping track, reflecting. And like I said, they can be as basic as hygiene. Whatever those 3 goals are that can be accomplishable. And that's the thing with goals. We want to keep those goals small. Sometimes, we can set a goal, I want to be, the president of the United States. Well, that's great, but there's a lot of steps to get there. And the first 3 steps, we might realize this isn't for us. And we can learn from that. But we can learn from that because we're evaluating those goals and we can set different ones. And again, accomplish that feeling of, I'm actually doing something for me, myself, and I. Here's an example of a productivity tracker or planner. So you can use these if you want to. You can download them off the internet. And this is just kind of a productivity tracker where we're not only putting a reflection, but maybe making some notes for the next day. And sometimes you can do these and we might even just use one section of them. That's still creating goals. Often if I'm running busy, I keep it on a to-do list for the night before, just because that will let me, again, get the sleep, get it out of my head, and a little bit to reflect. Some people talk about setting these up the night before, so the next day, again, we can reflect and then start a new one, and we're not just thinking of the same goals every day. So those are always good to keep in mind. So when we're talking about self-care, we've kind of talked about a lot of different things. But here are some big things to talk about as we're going to move into my next section here. So when we're talking about self-care, this involves our self-talk, our coping skills, and where we're at in our lives. How have our lives created that self-talk? And I know this is really might sound silly, but one of these activities that they had us do in a class for positivity is they asked us to start to spend a day thinking about how we talk to ourselves. Do we call ourselves names? Are you like, oh my gosh, stupid, why did you do that? How often are we calling ourselves names? How often are we telling ourselves we can't? How often are we putting or sabotaging our wellness and our goals and our coping because we tell ourselves we're not? So again, in our self-talk, we kind of sometimes need to reflect upon that. So in our positivity class, as we did this, we had to spend a day thinking through all of that. The next day, we had to come back and the teacher just simply asked, all those things you said to yourself, would you say to your best friend? And everybody stopped and everybody was like, oh my gosh, no, I would never say that. And there's your point where you start to think, why am I telling myself these things if the person who knows me best in the world wouldn't be saying these things to myself? So again, that's a little silly exercise, but it's something that can bring that around to again, think about how we're feeling in our days, how we're talking to ourselves when we're stressed at work. Maybe our boss, said something that made us very upset today, and thinking about, maybe my boss was just having a bad day. It really wasn't me and what I did. Maybe I messed up and now I need to take accountability. So, the self-talk is a big thing. Again, we talked about setting achievable goals. Those goals help us feel better. They help bring our mindset around. And then lastly, this is the last part we're going to talk about for today, is talking about this big one, which is mindfulness and being present in the moment, which is what our meditation and what our prayer might be at night about. It is also our breathing, hearing our breathing and moving our bodies and being present when we're moving our bodies. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about next as our wellness. But I'm going to stop and see if anybody has any questions before I go forward. I don't think so. Okay. So let's talk about this. We were talking about our self-care steps and healing. How often do we actually add mindfulness and self-awareness into our daily lives? So self-awareness can just be aware of where we're at in the moment. How often are we looking at our loved one or our child and are like, this is the perfect moment. I wish I could take a picture and capture it. How can we do that more in our daily lives to appreciate the little things? Like I talked about earlier, walking barefoot in the grass. People say I go on vacation and I walk on a beach and my whole mood changes. That's why that sand underneath our feeling, that different feeling on our feet. People talk about working out, that keeps us aware. We are working out, we can barely breathe, we're pushing our bodies, we're noticing where we are at in our workouts. We are practicing, if we practice yoga, if you're a runner or a walker, you'll notice that you go through some things in your head when you're walking or you're running. And I'm a person who does believe that walking and running is also meditation because you're stuck in your head for that little piece of time. So when we're talking about it, we just talked about this, how can we start to talk to ourselves better? And that is starting to become aware. And like we said, becoming aware in the moment of how we're talking to ourselves. So going back to that exercise where we were supposed to write down all day, like all the things we said to ourselves and evaluating the negative things. This is a big thing about being aware. Sometimes in changing habits, we have to be aware before we can change a habit. And before we can change a habit and become well, we have to know we're doing the habit. And so sometimes I always like to tell people, they're like, well, I haven't made any changes, but I've noticed I do it here, here, and here. That's huge, because right now you haven't noticed that. And now you're aware of when you're doing it. And now in that moment that you're doing it, whether it be, let's say, for example, biting your nails, you're like, okay, every time so-and-so shows up at my desk, I start biting my nails. How can I change, what's going on in that moment? So talking more about awareness, it is not uncommon for people to spend their whole lives waiting to start living. And this is a quote by Eckhart Tolle, who wrote a book called The Power of Now. And I always like to mention this book because when people think about celebrities, they're always like the one book that every celebrity from like Oprah to like Gandhi to like anybody you talk about, they're like, what is the book that changed your life? And they will tell you The Power of Now. Eckhart Tolle is a big believer in being present because that's when we live our best lives. And one of the things that he talks about in The Power of Now that is always stuck with me, and I always like to pass on to people, is when we start getting really anxious and we're looking forward, or we start getting really depressed because things weren't the way they were and we're looking backwards. If we take a moment to stop in the moment that we're at and realize that this moment might not be that bad, that's when we start living in the now. When you start to realize that where you are in this moment isn't that bad, it's what we're thinking about, these hypothetical situations and what was, that is really disrupting us reaching out and getting our wellness goals and our health goals in check. So I always like to plug that book because if you have not read it, he does great YouTube videos as well where he just kind of takes it apart. But I also like it because he talks about being conscious and living life, and he talks about it from all religious perspectives. So I really like that aspect because I think it allows people to kind of grasp it on their own space and their own place too. All right, now here's my big scary thing where everybody's going to be like, what is this monster that this lady just put up on the screen and why are we going here? So this is what's called the 8 limbs of yoga. And this is where we were talking about, I'm going to grab my pointer here, this wheel. So we can still see here that there is a wheel. And so when we teach yoga, we really focus on only 3 places of this wheel. We focus on our meditation, we focus on our breathing, our pranayama, and we focus on the actual postures. So when we really start getting into our self-care, that's when we bring in these other elements of our wheel here, except in yoga, we think about it more as concepts. So we start to evaluate our restraints. We try not to harm the people around us. We look to being truthful. We start observing the people around us and bringing study into how we can be better people. And so these are other kind of wheels, but for today, I just wanted to show this because when we talk about yoga, people think it is all these postures. We're just going to do these postures and we're going to be healthy people. And so I'm here today to tell you that is not what yoga is about. So as we go on, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to practice a little bit of breath control. Then we're going to do some physical postures, and then we're going to work on this meditation element. But again, I like to point out that this is important because this is what creates, again, our wheel of wellness in the yoga world. So just a little bit of difference, but again, applying that same basic concept that we need all of these elements in order to achieve who we best are in our lives. So let's talk about breath. And anybody who knows me knows the breath that they're talking about here is called an Ujjayi breath. And literally, I always call it the Darth Vader breath. But I always love this meme because most people tell you that this is exactly how they feel when they practice it. So we're going to practice our Darth Vader breath today. We're going to do our basic 3-part breath and then our breath of joy. So I'm going to leave this slide up to do our 3-part breathing. So let's start with that today. Let's get a little bit of like out of our chairs for a moment here. And I'm going to keep these slides up because you do not need to see me for this. And in fact, if you are in a place that you are safe and comfortable, we can go ahead and close our eyes. So like I said, we're going to start with this basic 3-part breath. And as we begin our 3-part breath, let's just place our hands on our heart. And we're going to do just a little basic observation here in our 3-part breath. So first things we want to notice here is the length of our inhale and our exhale. So just starting to notice if maybe one is longer than the other. And just slowly starting to even them up. You can even count here if you wanted to. So inhaling for maybe 2, 3, 4, 5, exhaling. Maybe even noticing how we're breathing. There's no requirement. We don't need to breathe strictly through our nose. We can breathe out or in of our mouth. We can do a combination of the two. So just kind of feeling our heart lifting up and expanding here. Maybe we can even feel our heart beat. Now let's go ahead and bring our hands down to rest on our belly. And we can do this a couple of different ways. We can stack one hand over the other hand, or we can make a little diamond pattern with our hands where our thumbs touch and our pointer fingers touch. And then our pointer fingers just point down to our belly button. Our thighs can kind of rest right at the bottom of our rib cage. And no matter where we're at, we can kind of relax our elbows down to our side. So here in our second part, we're starting to bring that breath into our middle bellies here. So we can feel that breath coming through our nose or our mouth, and expanding all the way into our ribs. Starting to access that diaphragm, starting to expand, maybe even we feel those ribs expanding. But just starting to notice, maybe we notice that we usually don't take our breath this deep. Maybe that's our observation here. Wherever we're observing, let's not make any judgments on it. Let's just be observers. Now that we've taken this into our lungs, let's go ahead and take it all the way down into our hips. So we can take our hands down onto that belly button, or we can just rest our hands on our hip bones. But now we're going to take that breath from our heart to our ribs, all the way down to our belly button. So we can think about expanding our belly as big as we can make it with that in-breath. I always like to say that we are filling our beach ball as big as we can. And then we're noticing as it deflates. And again, just keeping those breaths even. And maybe we can start to observe a little difference in our anxiety. We can kind of let go of any other thoughts as we're just feeling that breath moving. Now let's go ahead and relax. We can let go of that breath. So that's our basic 3-part breathing. I am a huge, you can do it anywhere. It's a good one if you have a Fitbit to turn on and actually look at your heart rate while you're doing it. You can actually see your breath coming down. But I usually start on most of my classes teaching that because it really gives us a moment to come back to our breath. And that's one of those things that's funny to talk about. And the reason I put this slide in here is it uses the word in the yoga world, pranayama, which basically means the breath is life. So when we're teaching, when we're thinking about our time, just sometimes listening to our breath and the way we feel can give a lot of reflection on where we're at with our life. So this is a good place just to come in, feel our breaths. I've had people be like, I've never actually breathed past my rib cage before. And, you know, just taking it down to my belly, I feel a whole different person inside of me. So I always think that this is a good place to ground ourselves again. Now let's come to this Darth Vader voice, or Darth Vader breath. So this one is a little bit more fun. Like I said, the technical name is Ujjayi, but I never can remember that when I'm teaching. So I like to call it the Darth Vader breath. It's also like you're fogging a mirror. So let's go ahead and practice this. We're going to inhale really slow through our nose. And then when we exhale, we're going to pretend we're fogging up a mirror. So we're going to open up our mouth just a little bit and give a little heavier exhale. So again, inhaling through our nose, exhaling through our mouth. Now this is probably one of the biggest breaths we use in yoga. As you notice here, you can actually kind of feel a temperature difference. As we're inhaling through our nose, we can feel this cool, calming air coming in our nose. And as we exhale, we can feel that heat leaving our bodies. And sometimes I also like to use this as a sigh. So sometimes you can inhale through your nose and then give a little sigh. Kind of the same thing. So we can kind of practice it either which way. This is probably the #1 breath that can bring our blood pressure down in a stressful situation. I myself have actually used it in a doctor's office where I was in a stressful situation and they're like, we got to get her blood pressure down. And I actually started doing this and they're like, how did you do that? And I'm like, I literally just breathed. And they're like, that's amazing. So I always like to say this is also a good one when you're in a car and you're stressed out, and you don't have to do it very much to feel the difference that this breath can make. And it's just kind of fun because, like I said, you can sigh, you can also imagine your Darth Vader. And then the last one we're going to do is our breath of joy. And I am actually going to come on camera here. Let me see if I can stop sharing for a second. And I'm going to switch my cameras here. And you're going to do these in a seat, but I'm going to just stand up for this one to do our breath of joy. And our breath of joy is a very basic breath. There is a psychologist who's written a book just based on breaths. And so I think this one is fun because there's some movement with it. However, people will actually experience a feeling of joy when we're doing it. So there are some hand movements to it as well with the breath. So let's start with the breath. So for our breath here, we're going to do 3 sniffs in our nose. So just and then our exhale is going to be a big sigh. And I like to tell people, and when I teach the cameras off, and I'm like, I hope that everybody living in your house can hear you doing this breath. So if we're in a place where we can be a little bit louder, we can have fun with it. So that's the breath here. It's 3 sniffs in and a big sigh. However, I like to make my people add a little bit of hands to it. So for this, our hands are just going to come out in front, out to the side, and then up to the sky. So let's start out. We're going to do 1 sniff and we're going to sniff our hands in front of us. Then we're going to sniff our hands to the side. Then we're going to sniff our hands up to the sky. And then we're going to give a big sigh and let it go. And shake our hands out when we do it. So let's do that again. Let's try again. Sniffing up with our hands. Sniffing out with our hands. Sniffing to the sky. Big old sigh. And then I like to tell people, show your drama with your sighs. Let it go. So let's do it again here. Sniffing up. Sniffing out. To the sky. Big old sigh. Now let's do that again. Now this one, I like to say for our last one, let's be very dramatic about it. So add your drama in it here. Sniffing up, sniffing out to the sky. Nice big sigh. And then I always say, let's go ahead and just pause for a second, close our eyes. And see if we notice any feeling in our body. And again, if we were doing this in a chair, it shouldn't make any difference. It's just 3 sniffs and a big sigh. All right, I'm going to come back to screen sharing. That one is my favorite breath because honestly, at the end of the day, it is a lot of fun. So even if you are super stressed out, you can't help but bring a little smile to your face. My students like it because, like I said, I love to say, show your drama, and then they'll go come on screen and they'll be all dramatic when they sigh, and they even start laughing. So, breath of joy is a really good one. And again, that's probably my favorite one. So again, reflecting on how does this make us feel, just that basic part of our breath and our breathing here, something as simple as that. So this kind of brings us to our overall wellness picture, and I'm just throwing this out here because we're going to shift and talk about meditation. part of our wellness initiative is I'm going to once a month start adding a meditation session for all PAYCO members. It is free to attend. I'm going to send all these links out and they will go, they'll be in the news as well. However, when you register through PAYCO, it's going to put all the dates on your calendar. You will need to go to my website to register, only because I need to make sure that you guys are signing my waiver, and I'm using my Zoom, so I'm not interfering with everybody else's. If there is a big participation, people are loving it, we can add more sessions, but I just wanted to start with a basic, this is what we do in meditation. What I'm going to do in these meditation sessions too as well is try different types of meditation. So we'll maybe do some yoga nidras, which just means it's a little bit longer. We'll do some tapping, and we'll talk about different meditation techniques that people do. I will also talk about, as Becky said, I started out meditating at 18, and I learned a technique called transcendental meditation, but I could teach it in a very simple way as well. So if you're interested, that's one of the things we're offering going in with our wellness. Talking about meditation, this is where we start working on our positive thoughts. Thinking one positive thought every morning can trick your brain into being a happier person. And this is a scientific fact. I do not remember where I got it. I think it was in my positive yoga. I should reference it here. However, this has been proven that you can change one thought in your morning. You can actually start to become a happier person. So kind of backing it up here, I've mixed my slides up, sorry guys. Also, I'm going to be offering yoga. So this is the yoga schedule. I'm going to be offering it Tuesday nights at 6:30 once a month. And like I said, if people are interested, I can add more. If you want to take and come to my other classes, definitely reach out to me, because I do, like I said, teach Monday through Saturday, and I'm going to be adding a restorative yoga for my members as well. So something to think about here. Can I flip to the next slide? All right. So I showed those slides out of order, so I apologize, because we're actually going to now do a very basic yoga, chair yoga session and a meditation, but I wanted to point out about our opportunities. Like I said, if you do know anybody who might teach HIIT classes, this, that, or the other, please reach out to me, because I would love to add those to the calendar and the schedule, and maybe they have more availability. But like I said, when you sign up through the PAYCO website, it's going to load it all on your calendars, but then you can go in and actually register for which classes you want to attend. So again, coming back to this golden rule here, why is self-care and yoga important in our current role that we work in? Well, taking care of ourselves, moving our bodies, and having a meditation practice can bring us a little bit more peace within our own mind when we're going to work in dealing with chaos. I will tell you, in my last job, I did a lot of yoga breaths at my desk, and I don't know if the people heard me. And when I was at my previous litigation job, we actually practiced yoga on our lunch hour. So something that we did just to kind of add it to our work environment. So I always think that this is really funny here, because let's talk a little bit about yoga, and then we're going to do a quick little practice here. As we're going to do our practice today, let me actually skip ahead a slide. I didn't realize what time it was, I apologize. So I really want to quickly touch upon this before we get in place and get seated. This slide is just talking about yoga props. For my classes, you just need to have a mat. And I always like to talk about supplies, because people get really gung-ho and they go buy all these different supplies. And to basically start, we need a mat. And if we don't have a mat, we can use a towel. If we want to go buy a mat, but we don't know for sure if we're going to love it, my best recommendation is Five and Below. They literally have $5 mats, and they also have these little $5 blocks if you wanted to add one prop. But again, not necessary when I'm teaching my classes. A towel or a blanket will very much work. We're not going to be doing crazy postures like crow and all these things where I'm going to need people gripped, and we're going to be very basic. So let's go ahead and practice. So let's go ahead. I'm going to move over to my chair here, and I'm going to stop sharing. And let's see here. And let's go ahead and move. If we're in a chair, that's perfect. Pull up my big window. Perfect. Okay. So we're going to be in a chair, which most of us are. And I'm wearing my crazy pants so that you guys can see my legs here. And let's just start off with, I think you guys saw my last slide. That was just basically, let's set an intention. So I always like to tell people what's something we want from our day. So let's take a moment here, wherever we're seated, and let's just bring our feet flat on the floor, bring our hands to rest on our thighs, and let's just give our eyes a little bit of rest here and close our eyes again if we're in a safe and comfortable environment. And let's just come in with that breath again. So evening out our inhales and our exhales. And again, we can try to just even them up. Now going back to that intention while we're here listening to our breath, maybe thinking about something we want or intend to do with our day. I like to tell people, keep it to a simple word. Like, I want to be happy today, or I want to be present. And then we can take that intention and start to repeat it to ourselves while we're listening to that breath very gently. So maybe that word today is present. You can start off with an I am. I am present. So we can just gently starting to repeat that to ourselves here. Now let's check in with our breath, make sure we're bringing it all the way down to our hips here as we inhale and exhale. We're going to come into our mountain in our chair. So again, we're going to make sure our feet look straight to us. So looking down at our toes, and then we're going to bring that big toe in, one width of our own big toe. And again, let's bring our hands maybe from our thighs down to our side. And let's just face our palms forward here in our chair. So we're thinking about a mountain here. We want to be like a mountain with our bodies, starting to think about stacking each one of our vertebrae on top of the next one, all the way up to our neck here. Now let's exhale and take those shoulders away from our ears with our hands still reaching down towards the earth. Nice big inhales through our chest. Now let's give a little bit of sigh here with our breath. Really working on bringing those shoulders away from our ears. Now let's take our right ear towards our right shoulder, keeping our shoulders where they are. And then we're just going to start to roll our chin from one side to the other. And we're just going to keep it here in front. Just rolling our neck a little bit. And again, we can close our eyes if we would like. Let's go ahead and bring our head back to center. Let's relax our arms. Let's shake our wrists out. Let's flex them back and forth. Let's wiggle our fingers. All right, let's do some shoulder rolls. So I always tell people to close our eyes. Let's close our eyes here. And let's just start to roll our shoulders. It does not matter what speed. It does not matter how big or how small. Kind of rolling our shoulders here. Again, trying to keep our minds focused on that breath. And as we're ready, let's switch directions with those shoulders. And again, however big or small we need them to be. So staying focused on what feels good. Now let's go ahead and relax our hands down. Let's shake our hands out again here. And let's bring our fingertips up to rest on our shoulders. So we're just touching our shoulders. And then we're going to squeeze our shoulder blades just a little bit together. So it's going to bring our heart up a little bit towards the sky. And then we're just going to take those elbows just a little bit further out to really feel that strength here. And let's just turn and look over our shoulder. So we're going to turn our neck and just look over that one shoulder than the other. And as we are doing this, let's go ahead and also think about shifting our eyes. So as we look over our left shoulder, we're just going to shift our eyes to look down and to the left. Nice and simple. And then coming back to center here, let's take our hands, let's relax them down. Let's take a nice big inhale and we'll lift our right arm up to the sky. And we're going to lift from our hip here. So thinking about as we inhale that this actual lifting of that arm is coming all the way from our belly through our armpit. Now our hand does not need to be really close to our ear. If it is more comfortable to have it out, that's fine because the lift is coming from our hip, that rib, and our armpit here. So acting as if we're trying to touch a button. And then let's go ahead and exhale, lowering our hand. Let's switch sides. So inhaling that other hand up, reaching for the sky. And again, bringing that lift up from our rib, armpit, all the way to those fingers. And we can close our eyes and imagine if we're trying to push a button. And then exhale, release. Now let's take our hands and reach for the back of our chair so we can reach for the sides of our chair. We're going to do a chest expansion here. So we can reach for the sides of our chair here to kind of lift that heart up, or we can do more of our traditional chest expansion by placing our hands on our hips, or even interlacing those fingers and pressing down. So we have a couple options here. What we're trying to get out of our chest expansion really is just lifting our heart up towards the sky. So our neck isn't tipping back, our head is not tipping back. It's in line with our spine, and we're just trying to bring those shoulder blades together. And again, lifting our heart up, thinking about opening our heart space. And then exhale, let's go ahead and relax. Now let's go ahead and bring our hands to rest on our legs here. And we're going to come back to our intention here. So let's start to think about that intention and just beginning to, again, repeat it to ourselves as we are resting in our chair. And it's okay if we become distracted. The moment we notice we're distracted, just go back to repeating that word. Let's notice the sounds around us. Maybe what's in the room right around us. Maybe we're listening for some sounds that are outside of the space that we're in. Let's notice our breath here as we're listening. Are we continuing to breathe deep into our bellies? Now let's bring our hands to come and rest on our heart center. And to wrap up, I always like to finish up with 3 deep breaths. So let's go ahead and take 3 deep breaths together. Nice big inhale. Nice big exhale. One last big breath. And as we exhale today, reminding ourselves of the intention we've set, choosing to be present throughout our day, and as always, being kind to the people around us. I appreciate all of you guys coming and listening to me today. Peace.
Thank you, Cassandra. Thank you everyone for attending today. Have a great day.